Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsman here, coming at you with a standard meta tier list video. Also a bit of an analysis. Anyway, so yeah, it's here. I posted a poll pretty recently as a follow-up to a poll on what kind of content you guys like to see, tier list and deck profiles being the standout favorites with the audience. And this follow-up poll was about, okay, so what kind of tier list video would you like to see? Now, I did the V one prior to this, and that had been winning initially, but now standard really popped up, and so I'm like, okay, I was intending to do standard anyway, so let's get right to it and make it a priority, because this is going to be my first standard tier list video, and I'm excited to make it and, give a crack at it. So what's similar and what's different about this video as we're entering into it? Well, let me just say straight up that we're going to be looking at this not by clans, but by individual decks. Standard runs on nations, or ride lines, how you want to look at it. And there are a lot of them. I can't just simply say, oh, Gear Chronicle, and that's going to encompass all these Dark States decks. It doesn't work that way. So we're going to be looking at them deck by deck. And the evaluation criteria is going to be rather holistic, but it's on the basis of how viable are they competitively speaking. So we're not going to be talking about how fun they are or how interesting they are, nor are we going to be talking about just purely how strong they are. Strength is a large factor to their competitive viability, but I am going to just say straight up, that is the standard. So even a deck that is pretty strong, if for one reason or another it's not really showing up on the competitive circuit, those lack of results may hurt its ranking, and I want that to be clear. Furthermore, there are some decks that are relatively new and need more support, so by virtue of that, they're probably going to go down here, but their potential is really nice, and I'm going to outline the ones that have a lot of potential for what they could do to improve it, or as basically saying, hey, it's not there yet. It just needs more of anything. Now, having said all that, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to this person right here. They made this tier list, not me. So, giving them a little bit of credit right here because it's the good thing to do. And speaking of not me making this tier list, I would have included a couple of collab decks. I'm not very interested in collabs, so they're not like down here, and I'm okay with that. However, there are a couple of honorable mentions as far as collab is concerned because a couple decks actually have competitive relevance. One is the Ebisu deck from Monster Strike 2. That is definitely a monster that just released, and it's hot on the circuit right now. And it would just straight up be in the top tier here if I had an image for it, so that needs to be made clear. And as for Yo from the Shaman King collab, we're going to put him around here because Yo does have some tops occasionally. It does pop up. It's not the most top tier thing, and I don't think it's quite as impressive as decks such as Flagburg, which, spoiler alert, would go into the highly competitive tier. However, you would not be remiss with taking Yo to a regional or something, and you could do pretty well with it, I think. So yeah, Yo would go pretty middle of the road here. I think it's got a lot of good stuff going for it. And that aside, no mention of Record Ragnarok or Token Rambu. Nothing's really happening with those sort of nations, as they're called. They're just collab decks that haven't really made it up there. Token was pretty good near the beginning, and that's it. So that's all the mention I'm going to make from collabs. Having said that, let's go ahead and dive right in. So starting with Nirvana. Now this is going to be the grade 4 Nirvana version, Mahar, whatever you want to call it. It's going to go into the top tier. Now as it develops, I try to keep it to where what I think is more impressive in a tier to the left and less impressive to the right. It's going to be a little bit more iffy because standard is more well balanced as a format. So that means that everything within tier is pretty freaking relative, and they're also somewhat relative to the tiers above and below them. Because of that, even though Mahar may go up or down within the top tier, it's still one of the best decks and could beat any other of the top tier decks. So do keep that in mind as the list develops. As for explaining why Mahar is here, well, let's just say that it's got the sublime combination of strong consistency pieces and a very powerful offensive output. So the way Mahar works, generally speaking, is you have a restanding grade 4 to pair off with your main grade 4, this restanding grade 4 being a really big beater. Now that means that Mahar can achieve 5 attacks in a turn, and they can be really big. Mahar himself is already giving 10k to the front row. So these guys, these grade 4 Varenas, we'll just call it, those Varenas, they are swinging for 23 at first, and they're going to stand up, get a lot of huge numbers, and go again. The thing that's a really big kicker with that is Mahar comes in with triple drive pressure and the ability to ping a damage as long as they're 4 or less every turn. So you're able to just slam the opponent constantly and give a lot of good offensive pressure. And because of the triple drive and the ability to recur resources and search them, after all, this has the ability to recycle overdress units, add them from the deck to the hand, and also recycle the trick stars. It's got all that going for it. So you have a fantastic resource game to keep you in the game and just beat down the opponent over the course of 2 to 3 turns if need be. This is a really, really powerful deck. And I think of all the competitive decks, I would consider Mahar to be what you consider the baseline for a top deck. This is sort of the kind of deck that you would want to practice against for going to a competitive scene, because it's just got all of the good notes. It's not necessarily the top tier deck among the top tiers. It's not the best in my opinion, but it is the one that I would consider to be the standard. So it's got to go up here for that reason alone. As for Java, it has potential. Yeah, it has potential, but it's not really looking so hot. So the thing is that Java has a couple ways of support so far, and that has done it like kind of good, but it's not nearly like Mahar, and that's fine. After all, Mahar has been established for a long time by comparison. Nirvana has been out since the very beginning. It was one of the starter decks, so that is a lot of support to give it. Java is relatively new, and it doesn't have a lot going for it. But what does it do? Well, mainly with Java and the crossover dress mechanic, we're looking at the ability to also get multi-attack, but it's only a 4 attack turn at max potential, so it's less than that. And your best targets are going to be either Varena, Varena, or Garo Varena. Now, Garo does have the Battle Door effect. That's kind of neat. Braum has the ability to do more retires. That's really nice. And Battle can like retire basically your opponent's entire board if you get the soul setup, but it's very costly. And Barrow also has the ability to do rearguard drive checks. That is also really nice. However, here's the thing. While Java does have a couple of advantages, mainly the rearguard drive checks are really nice, and it also has an advantage when it comes to retirement. The field control is better in this version. Java suffers due to a lack of that 5th attack by comparison, and the main suffering point, I think, is it's pretty resource heavy. It needs a lot of CB, but not a lot of ways to countercharge. And even though you can soul charge a fair bit, Varena is such a gas guzzler in terms of soul that it still doesn't feel like enough sometimes. But CB is the main issue. On top of that, the cross overdress mechanic is a very heavy piece reliant strategy. You need your cross overdress unit, your trick star, and your prayer dragons all lined up turn after turn. Java's skill really helps with this, reviving the prayer dragon and the trick star. But still, it does feel oftentimes like you're not able to line things up for that cross overdress, especially over the course of few turns, being able to maintain doing that. Ramada does help being able to draw 2 and discard 1. That's a really nice consistency piece, but it costs a CB, as does Varena, as does Java. You see my point, right? It can't continue for very long, and its burst is not nearly as impressive as Mahar's. So that's why it's down here. What I think this deck needs is strong resourcing options, particularly with Counterblast, and also probably a major go-to cross overdress unit that just makes the strategy come together for a nice finishing push. If it doesn't have 5 attacks like Mahar, it needs to have a nice cross overdress finisher that's even stronger than Mahar. Barrow is kind of cool, but Barrow has drive checks and retires, and it's more of a advantage game kind of card. It's not the finisher that we need. So that's what Java needs to improve. Tamaguda. I find Tamaguda to be highly competitive. Now, or yeah, like it's going to be on the lower end highly competitive, but Tamaguda like has been popping up a fair bit, especially since it just got like a new piece of support, which is debatably useful or not. I find Tama to be a really, really nice strategy. The thing about Tama is that it has a pretty cool offense. It's a little bit low in terms of power lines, and if the opponent does get a defensive, it does hurt. However, Tama makes up for this in a lot of ways. Not only does it have really strong defense game, thanks to the interceptors that go into soul and come back out, as well as the pseudo Shiryuki Yorder, but Tama also has the ability to resource really well by calling back units from the soul and giving your soul back. It has not really a need of CB. The only thing that you really need CB for is going to be Tama herself, and that's freaking it. That's wonderful. So you can't really CB deny this deck very easily. You would have to completely deny it instead of starving it. And even then it can tank down. And from there, it also just has really nice tools at its disposal. The Stealth Fiends are really nice tools that it can use. Anything that can go into Soul is going to be a nice thing that it can use. We've seen a few instances of that. It has a really nice over trigger, and it's just overall a nice potent deck that's able to maintain that consistent level of offense. Thanks to the 15k gets to the front row on Persona Ride turns, you're hitting the really nice numbers that you need to. And so Tama is able to just whittle away at the opponent turn after turn after turn. And in terms of attrition decks, this is one of the best. This is definitely one of the best, especially since it doesn't have the Dark States problem, where Dark States can attrition better, well, some of them anyway, but then they deck out because of Soul Charge mechanic. This doesn't do that. A lot of the soul that it accrues is actually accrued through resources not of the deck. They're cards going in from field into soul, from drop into soul, etc. They're not constantly getting rid of your deck, so you do have good late game, and that's what I like about Tama. So yeah, I'm going to put it in the highly competitive. It'll go down later on, but I find this deck to be very impressive. Overlord is also highly competitive, even more than Tama. Overlord just has been popping up a lot lately, and it's not really much of a surprise. The thing about the end is, because of the Vanguard-centric offense, which is really nice, and the ability to retire the opponent's rears, have the on-hit pressure, and the promo, which gives you essentially free advantage, is a lot of powerful boons to this deck. The promo is especially really nice. After all, when you're discarding it, that's your discard cost right there. So when you restand Overlord, you're going to get more out of your drive check economy than you normally would have. It's going to be a 13k booster in the back row for free. That's really nice, and it's just a really good offense that Overlord brings to bear. Now, I will admit that for Overlord, it's not like in the top tier here, because it has a sort of a mid-roll to it. Like, you can high roll your opponent out of existence if they're in a moment of vulnerability. You get a lot of critical triggers and stuff like that. But the thing about Overlord is, similar to Tama, it sort of whittles them down. You're going to have to just fight through those PGs. You're going to have to fight through their ability to replenish their board, even if you do get rid of them with some of your range retire options. Overlord lists tend to go up and down on how much retires they have. But eventually you're going to get to a point where they can't hold you back. And the real trick with Overlord is it able to withstand to that point? That could be turn 4 on a Persona Ride, turn 5 even, 6 in extreme cases, something like that. So in those games, if you're able to hold on for that long and kill them, you've got it. And Overlord tends to be able to do that because the drive checks can hit you good triggers. It can hit you into that promo, which is just a good advantage for you. And, you know, when you're with the promo, if you have the regular Dragonic Overlord and Soul, then you're just straight plussing on your drive check economy. That is really nice. So there's a lot going for Overlord, just pretty strong deck overall. It does what Overlord, like, always does. And, I mean, hey, what else does it need to do? Eugene. So, Eugene, I would say it's possibly viable. No, I'm gonna put it at like Rogue. So Eugene got a really nice card in set 7, a couple actually. You have the Meteor Flare for really good retires and shutting off con abilities, and you also have, and this in my opinion is the really big one, you've got Oswald. Now, I'm not sure how many people have been paying attention, but Eugene now has a pseudo Dragonic Overlord turn at their disposal. Here's how it goes. So the power lines with Dragonic Overlord, which is something I didn't mention, is pretty good, right? Especially your Burning Horns getting more power. Dragonic Overlord itself can get trigger effects and stuff like that. That's really nice. Now, Eugene doesn't have like quite that going for it because its restand's a little bit inferior. It needs the Oswald to boost it. It stands up with minus a drive after a CB and a discard, and it reduces the crit as well. So its restand isn't quite as good. However, here's the thing. Your retiring, your field control is way better. You can wipe out an opponent's entire field almost reliably, and that isn't even just for one turn of the game. You could do that a couple times, well, rather a couple turns, maybe even more if you got a pretty good hand going for you. You could just wipe out the opponent's units so easily and still have that four attack offense, which perfectly complements the Eugene's skill to give it more power. So you actually do have pretty good power lines between that. Dustin gets 2k for each of their open rears. Meteor Flare gets a pretty big power buff as well, as long as the opponent's grade 3 or greater. So your power lines have been increasing. Your field control is as good as ever, and now you've got a 4th attack in the deck thanks to Oswald. It has beefed up. I will tell you that in fighting Eugene, it is a really hard deck to fight, especially with Best Harvest, which grants it a lot of card advantage in order to just be able to stay in the game and just maximize on that control benefit. It is an annoying ass deck. The only reason why it's not highly competitive is that even though set 7 is released, we haven't seen like terribly good results for Eugene. Now, of course, it can pop up, but it's not like, oh, the classic Overlord that you see like one of in top 8 a lot of the time, you know? So Eugene isn't quite as proven. However, it's still got just that level of strength that it should be a pretty viable, if nothing else, just a good rogue deck. Bavsagara. Now, Bavsagara is a interesting thing for me because Bavs does tend to pop up, I noticed. It is pretty good. However, at the same time, it can be a little bit unconvincing. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it a highly competitive. However, I'm going to put it as it goes on, going to be near the bottom. So Bavs is one of my babies in Standard. It is probably my second favorite deck in Standard, which is kind of saying a lot. And I mean, I've already done a profile on her as well. So this is one of those decks that I have more of a knowledge base on. The thing with Bavs is that set 7 gave it a really, really nice card too, and that's Samadhi. With Samadhi, your ability to get 2 armed cards by turn 3 is not only much more consistent, but it's much easier thanks to Samadhi's ridiculously simple skill of just retiring itself to arm from hand or drop. This more or less power creeps a Darla, which means you can run less grade 3s in the deck and more grade 1s in the deck. Grade 1 being a way more important grade thanks to Bavsagara being able to revive it back. And with Samadhi, if you keep on reviving back with Bavsagara, you've created this loop where you can just keep on arming it, get the soul charge, and just go from there. So it's a really, really good consistency piece. And this has highlighted Bav's ability to splash in an element of control, which is a really strong, powerful Vanguard swing. It's very much like Leonor. The thing that separates these two decks being that with Bavs actually has a couple of X factors for it. The resource game is way better than Leonor, and thanks to the arm cards, particularly the shield, you have this really cool defensive option that can help tank. So thanks to the shield and the revival skills of both herself and Aushnia, you can actually keep your hand pretty nice and chunky. And you can also limit how much damage you need because you don't need that much CB. Unless you use sword, you don't need that much CB per turn. So you can guard a lot if need be without worrying about being able to pay for your cost next turn. That is one of Bav's greatest benefits. However, there are a couple things going against Bavs. A lot of your offense is based on Trick Moon, which, you know, may or may not appear. And if they PG your Vanguard, it does hurt because you put the crit on there. You've presumably boosted it with Trick Moon. That's kind of rough, but it's not the end of the world. You still just have to pressure them out of it. So if your opponent happens upon a lot of PGs, it is going to hurt you pretty bigly. Now, bigly not being a word. Oh, God. Now, another thing for Bavs is if you run a lot of arm cards, you could brick with your arm cards in hand. So I've noticed sometimes it could have shield problems. Watch out for that. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, hell, want to talk about shield problems, look at Bastion. But it's still something to know. Bavs does perform fairly well. We do see it pop up a fair bit. I think that's the thing that puts me into the highly competitive for it, is just the fact that we do see it. So even if it may not be the most convincing, people find a way, and so I think it deserves to be up here. So yeah, I don't know why the Mahar is up here. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and just take Chakravarti down there. This is just Mahar. Same explanation. I don't need to talk about it. Chaos. It's struggling. So the thing about Chaos is we basically have a Highlander version of Dark States, and that's a really neat idea. The thing that gets me about Chaos, though, is that for all the setup that you need to go into the Chaos deck, it doesn't give you a lot of benefit. The payoff is, it's okay. You manage to potentially get 5 attacks in a turn. That's cool, and power lines can be kind of decent, especially with Makani, but you know, that's more or less where it goes. I do like some elements of Chaos, and Dark States does historically have really nice staples to go with it, but those staples are a little bit tricky in Chaos because it is, again, a Highlander version. So that's what makes Chaos a bit more of a struggle street for me, because it's so esoteric to what the nation particularly does. I don't know. I'm not very convinced by it. It does have some potential, to be fair, but I just think that as it stands, it is struggling. So I just want to put Chaos down here. I wish I had more to say on it, but in all honesty, due to the lack of data and also just a lack of attention to it, it did recently get an order, which is pretty nice. That is like a granted benefit for it, but we haven't seen that order in action. We don't know how much you run, so it is all a big variable right now. So I'm just going to leave it at struggling for the time being, but it could go up. Greedon. So Greedon I'm going to put at the rogue tier. The thing about Greedon is Greedon feels like the Spike Brothers deck. And I don't mean the Spike Brothers deck as in Bruce. No, I mean Spike Brothers as in that one Spikes guy that you meet at locals or regionals or something like that, particularly regionals. Let me explain. So in my previous tier list, I brought up how there's this Spikes phenomenon where there's always going to be that one Spikes guy that's pretty good at their deck, and they're going to potentially kill you if you aren't prepared to deal with them. They just find a way to be able to combo you out or just hit the proper key notes in the game to just really pressure you. And it's sort of an experience gap where, oh, okay, have you encountered the Spikes guy? And if you have you learned how to deal with them? And that would be one of your main obstacles in order to ensuring that you get a top rather than going X2 or, you know, even worse. Greedon is kind of that way. The thing about Greedon is at first glance, he's not all that impressive, but Greedon has done some stuff. He was topping a BRO. I've also heard there was a pretty good Houston top with Greedon, so on and so forth. So he does pop up. The big thing about Greedon that people hate, and anyone who's fought this deck, especially at regionals, will tell you, 2 to passing this thing is kind of devastating. The 2 to pass is Greedon's favorite thing to break. Watch out about that, because this happened a lot, especially in BRO. I was talking to a couple judges for the BRO event, this past BRO, not the one before, but this past one. Yeah, there was some Greedon action going on because people kept 2 to passing it and losing. I know that seems like a weird high roll thing, so I mean, how are they going to, hit the double trigger? It just happens. It really does. And the trick with Greedon that people don't seem to realize is oftentimes they think of Greedon as, oh, okay, a couple of van swings and, maybe a rear guard swing, and that's it. You could get 3 van swings. It's pretty late game to do that. You need to do a lot of setup for it, but it can happen. But Greedon is pretty much like at that level. You can get extra swings though. That is the thing. You can get extra swings, and a good Greedon player is going to be able to analyze, oh, okay, this is probably what I can infer their hand is, and they'll change up their offense accordingly. For instance, if they use a lot of their hand to guard the first attack, but you have, your rear guard set up on, columns on either side, and they just are down to a card or 2 in hand, you can presume they probably have that PG. So you don't restand with Greedon, you just swing with your rear guards. And that could kill them. So that is a pretty good way to look at it. Furthermore, Greedon has X Factor benefits. The extra drive is always good. It's always good to get the checks. One of the things I really like about Greedon is it's pretty anti-field control because you suck up all your rear guards. That is an X Factor for it. Another X Factor for it is the 7 damage thing. Not only does that mean you can get more CB and it's harder for you to die, but you can deny 6 damage heals. That could be potentially big if the situation calls for it. So yeah, Greedon just has enough things to make it a pretty good rogue deck. It could pop up, and if you're not prepared for it, you might be lunch. Dragold. Okay, so Dragold I'm going to put as rogue as well. So the thing about Dragold that is, it has been popping up at BCSs, or, well, I think in Japan has been popping as part of like team battles, and the problem of course, is with team results, you take it with a grain of salt. You don't know how well that particular person performed throughout the day. They could have been carrying, or they could have been carried potentially. That means that it's somewhat dubious. However, we have seen Gradual pop up a fair bit, so this kind of goes to show that people have some level of confidence with it. And I would agree. Playing with the deck a fair bit, and also playing against someone who's really into Gradual does feel like it's got distinct benefits and weaknesses. Its offense is really nice if you hit your Rocket Gurus especially. The ability to dust the opponent is really, really good. And I also think it has decent card advantage going for it. The Ride Line can get you some draws, the Jewel Core giving you the extra attack. You also can get extra advantage and the ability to retire even. Bristol Gator giving you that retire. And of course, it's a 5 attack turn at its greatest. Here's where it starts to go a little bit iffy though. CB resourcing is hard. You don't have access to Selfish Engraver. Believe me, it's not happening. So, barring that, what's your countercharge? It's not really anything good. So, you don't get countercharge, and you need CB for a lot of things. Your Rocket Gurus use a CB apiece. Your Gradual itself uses a CB. Power Gem uses a CB. Miloslava, Shri, they all use CB. So CB is a very, very big issue, and it bottlenecks your ability to push with Gradual. And if you can't kill within the turn 3 or the turn 4, you start to taper off in your ability to kill the opponent, especially if they're using field retires, because another thing about Gradual is somewhat piece sensitive. In order to maintain your ability to Soul Blast 4 and also have a serviceable offense, you need different pieces. Bulkade to ensure that your soul is looking pretty with all 4 different grades. Ristal Gala can give you some retires, so that's really nice. Rocket Guru is probably the most important piece of the deck. With that, you get extra multi-attack and really nice power lines, and without Rocket Guru, you're not hitting nearly as hard. So that is a really important piece as well. There's just a lot that goes into this deck, and it's pretty easy to lose steam with this deck, either through the field controls, or just because you ran on CB. So that's where it falters. However, it does have a pretty incredible offense. So if you're able to line things up properly, you can definitely kill the opponent within the first couple turns so you have access to Gradual. That is where its strength is. And that's why I think it's fairly viable. It can do its thing and it can succeed, but it does have very distinct weaknesses to it. So that it's more or less in the middle. This guy needs more. Baphomet, he's people joke that he's the Dark States Bastion, and I guess you could make that joke. He doesn't have the support that Bastion does. He doesn't even have a ride line. So there's not really a lot to say here. I just thought I'd include him to really say, yeah, he does need more. He is kind of neat, but there's just not a lot going on with this guy. Bruce. This is grade 3 Bruce. Grade 3 Bruce is fairly viable, I think. Grade 3 Bruce does have the ability to use things like your Leonards and whatnot. It has a really nice toolbox. The ability to field control, the ability to get a lot of soul, the ability to call additional units from the soul for extra multi-attack or resourcing thanks to Julian being a really magnificent piece for this deck. And also, the access to the orders, which gives you counter charge, crit pressure, more draw power. The orders for Bruce are actually very nice. So Bruce has a lot of tools, which would be expected considering that most of the, Gen 1 starters, to make a Pokemon reference, most of your Gen 1 starters tend to have a lot of tools to bear because of the history behind them. So Bruce is like that. The thing about Bruce though is it hasn't been popping up that much. It does pop up occasionally, but it hasn't really been able to push through that much. And here's I think the reason for the grade 3 Bruce not doing quite as well. The thing about grade 3 Bruce is it is almost exclusively a turn 4 deck. Now, thanks to Jewel Core, you do have a nice early game aggressor piece. On top of it being able to call itself back into soul and then call it out with Julian for a clean multi-attack. It does have those pieces. However, what's to say that grade 4 Bruce can't do the same thing? That is a really defined thing. So Bruce just has a really nice offense, but it waits up for it a little bit. Its early game's not really that great. Plus, it needs to be able to constantly watch out for that 5 soul, and that could be an issue. And if you're CBing a lot, that could be kind of problematic. Now, the CB of this deck is not as problematic as CB as this deck because your main Vanguard doesn't need the CB. But yeah, just by the very virtue of Final Rush, it its payoff isn't quite as explosive as I think Grade 4 Bruce's is, but it does make up for that with more tools. Grade 4 Bruce, though. Grade 4 Bruce, I would say, is fairly viable. So we see it often as well. I think it's above Grade 3 Bruce, but it's ever so slightly. If you were to say about a favor, I would say it's like a 45-55 in favor of Grade 4 Bruce. It just has that extra push thanks to the 6 attack, one of them being the Vanguard swing. The triple drive is a really nice added benefit. The fact that it's 4 drives total is really nice. It has that over Grade 3 Bruce as well. You can use different pieces such as Lyle. There's also the Grade 3 that gives a crit to your Vanguard. Things that give a critical to your Vanguard is really going to get more mileage out of a restanding Vanguard with Grade 4 Bruce. So yeah, it's a pretty impressive offense. However, its downsides include, of course, being a little bit more slow. Just as it is with Grade 3 Bruce. However, it's more CB intensive, so you could get CB denied pretty easily. I know Fervent is a counter charge, but you know what, you may not always see Fervent, and so you can get bottlenecked out of your offense, whereas Grade 3 Bruce, not so much. So yeah, that is a thing that's going against it. Okay. Barrow. Barrow is a rogue deck. I'm gonna put it right here, in between Greedon and Eugene. So the Barrow, it hasn't really been popping up in the meta lately, but Barrow did get some pretty cool like tools for it. Lilac Rusher being a really nice finishing beater, and I think the thing that I like best as far as the new tools go, now it has more of an ability to just close out games with its skill, and its skill is devastating. Barrow has progressively become more and more of a fine mixture between offense and defense. However, its main problem of decking out is still there. Now, it's not as bad because you do have Ludily in order to put back in a lot of your cards from Soul so that you don't deck out from it. However, you're not always going to see that card, and even with you do, you know, it is a CB game, so you do have a lot of CB units. Selfish Engraver is I would think it's basically the best countercharger in the game, and it is so perfect for Barrow. It is made for Barrow, and it could really spam those engravers. It gets it, so CB isn't that much of a problem. However, Barrow does suffer when it comes to hand advantage. It doesn't get a lot of advantage. It needs to throw its pieces out there on the board, and then it gets all sucked into Soul. Now, you call 2 back, but still, you threw out some pieces, and you probably like negged in the process. Your opponent's negging too, but so are you. You don't have a lot of advantage engines to keep in the game. So, if Barrow isn't able to close out quickly, it could die pretty suddenly, and that's its problem. So, because its defense is lacking, you could try to incorporate elements to keep its defense up, but then it's the transitive property, more defense, less offense, and striking that balance is really weird with Barrow. And I just don't see it being like up here, not just because of the lack of results, but also because Barrow feels as though it needs to high roll with certain things. It needs to high roll with the ponies, get the Amandines out there, and get to 15 as quickly as possible. Because if you don't hit to 15 on turn 3, you're kind of in dire straits. It's going to be a lot harder to win because, again, you don't have a good advantage game. So if your opponent suddenly starts hitting you hard and you weren't able to just meet in kind and keep up with the tempo, you're going to fall behind, and that's probably all she wrote. So Barrow needs to go for a need for speed, and that can be somewhat tumultuous as far as deck strategies go. It's still pretty good, though, and it's one of its high roll is... yeah, its high roll is one of the best out there, I think. When Barrow has a good day, it will kill you quicker than most other decks. That is what I can tell you. Bastion. Okay, so let me see real quick. Is there a Grade 4 Bastion somewhere? Because if there is, I'm going to bring it up here. There it is. Yeah, so let's just put regular Bastion out here because it's basically Grade 4 Bastion, and it's a top tier deck. Bastion is just been, it smashes, dude. It really smashes. Now, I will say that Bastion, you could make an argument for being near the top of highly competitive, and as a matter of fact, I think I think you could very well do that. I like to think that Bastion is pretty much neck and neck with Mahar in terms of its ability to just level the opponent with huge numbers. I would say that out of this entire game, your cumulative numbers, so you know, maybe one column in one deck could be reaching higher, maybe brainwashed rollers and a Barrow could get really high, but When you add up all the swings and their individual powers and accumulate it for the turn, Bastion has the highest numbers. Your grade 3 beatdown deck is ridiculous. It is extraordinary how hard Bastion can hit. However, just as we see with Barrow with the back and forth of offense and trade for defense, this thing's just like, okay, we'll crank offense to mother effing 10, but our defense is going to suffer because we have a lot of grade 3s and also some grade 4s. That is true. However, you do have good defensive tools in the form that one grade 3, I forget its name, but it's essentially a 20k shield when you're on grade 4. That's a good defensive tool. You have all your triggers there. You still have your PGs there. The Elementary Sanctitude is still there. So you can still live pretty securely. With Alden and also Lagriel, that's his name, Alden Lagriel, you can get more draw power. There's a lot of draw power here. Now, it comes by way of using a lot of CB, but CB is sort of a free resource for you. You will use it up really quickly, but you will use it up not because you needed to use it up, but because, you know, you had it there, and so you wanted to eat your candy, buckaroo. That is a good point for Bastion. Its resourcing is definitely a really good resource game. It will eat it like a hog, but you just get your pick, and you don't feel bad without it. That's what I like about Bastion. But because of the crippling defense element, it could die a fair bit of time, but people, they make it work. They do make it work. And although Bastion's card advantage, which is really good, can be deceptive depending on the hand, if you know how much damage to take and you can set the pace of the game with Bastion, you're good. You can just as easily on turn 4 already kill. Just because of the 5 attack turn that just beats the ever-loving crap out of the opponent. So even though you could argue that it's highly competitive because, you know, Overlord and Bastion sees like similar level tops, I've noticed, I'm going to put grade 4 Bastion just a bit above Overlord because it has sort of rep as being the best offense in the game. In my opinion, it's the best offense in the game. Okay, Hexa. So Hexa I'm going to put like right around here. So Hexaorb it got new support in set 6, and that's really nice for it. It's turned into, you know what? Yeah, we don't really see Hexa doing much. Yeah, here's the thing. Hexa does have a lot of it does have a lot of potential. It's possibly viable, and its potential has been sort of maxed out. Here's the problem I find with Hexa. Hexa has good deck stacking ability, and its card advantage is kind of neat, and Wanted Persona Right is very threatening, but it doesn't feel as impressive. I feel that with Hexaorb, you're sort of waiting for turn 4 to really burst out on the opponent, and by then the opponent has either like shredded a lot of what you've got, so you can't really respond in kind easily, or they've spent the extra like bit of time preparing for your offense, getting those PGs, getting those high shields, and going from there. Hexa is pretty limited in its offense. It feels like a pretty mid OTT deck, but, you know, reimagined for the standard format level of power creep and design. That's its problem. Now, I will say for Hexa that it does have pretty good Keter options that it can use as tools. You can use the painkillers if you want. You can use crit pressurers. You can do a lot of things with Hexa. It does have a pretty cool toolbox, but I don't think it makes the most effective use of that toolbox. And for the Hexa strategy, for all it's worth, I just don't see it being all that impressive. Now, you could, of course, kill with Hexa if the opponent doesn't have a lot of guards, but you're kind of relying on the opponent being more of a weakened position to secure the kill. Because if you can't do that, and you can't secure the kill, then you've kind of come into a back and forth, which, okay, who has the better ability to defeat the opponent in more of this attrition game? And it doesn't attrition quite as well. So, yeah, for a deck that is sort of sacky, it doesn't have that good of a capacity to sack, in my opinion. Now, some people could make Hexa work better. I did hear that Hexa does have like some stuff going for it, and I do respect Hexa in matches, but it just hasn't been performing as well as I think it could. So it does have potential. It does have a lot of potential to like go up there. It's possibly viable. MLB is definitely struggling. The thing about MLB is it got like some amount of support. Emmeline is a cool promo, and of course the use of Blaster Dark and, you know, the Blaster stuff is really nice. But what's your payoff with MLB? It can get a drive to go with its crit pressure and 2K, and that's about it. It's a 3 attack deck. the 2k defensive can pop up, but more often than not, you'll be like unpleasantly surprised by how often the opponent can just make that feel irrelevant. And yeah, it doesn't do a lot. You know, it's got good consistency, and the blaster name is a really good boon for it, but the payoff is just not nearly as good as something like PBO. So yeah, it struggles, dude. Its strategy doesn't feel like it's worth it, but it could be worth it if it got tools to make MLB a more threatening Vanguard. I think that's where we go from here with that. So that's where you can make it improve. Thagria. So Thagria, I think, is fairly viable. I like Thagria in the sense that it has a lot of good card advantage going for it, and the ability to get like pretty strong persona rides thanks to the order and have more persona ride targets technically in your deck than a lot of other decks is a lot of boons. However, there's a couple things that I feel Thagria is a little bit off with. For all the card advantage in the world, you're also running a fair bit of grade 3s in the deck usually, so that card advantage can be sort of a hollow defense. And to pair with it, for all of your advantage, what's your offense looking like? Well, on a Persona Ride turn, you can have pretty good numbers, and you can also have Dark Thagria restand. However, this restand isn't every turn. You have to sort of cycle between your Thagrias in order to constantly get their final and quote-unquote best effect. And because you're having to cycle it, you're having to juggle the Thagrias. You're not always going to be having the Vanguard restand. Sometimes it's a Rearguard restand, which can be good, but it's not quite as good as the Vanguard restand, in my opinion. And ultimately, your offense falls a little bit flat by comparison. So then you come into the same basic question that we have been talking with a lot of different decks. We have been talking with it with Barrow. We've been talking with it with Hexa. We're going to talk with it with ye old Thagria too. What is going to be the greater balance? Does your cumulative defense offense outmatch your opponents? And I think sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It sort of comes to, all right, did you respond well to the opponent's matchup? Did you mitigate your damage so that you can take some of the bigger attacks? And overall, how did the game go for you, right? Thagria goes a little bit back and forth. Sometimes it can completely smack down the opponent, but then other times it feels completely underwhelming, especially if it goes second. Because Thagria is so reliant on the Persona Ride, if you go second with the deck, you're out of pace. It's hard to keep up. So that is a pretty oof element for it. It's been doing pretty good in the West, but it's going to start dropping off because of the new cards and the new support. Its power level is dropping off a bit. Now, it's going to get a new support card pretty recently. As a matter of fact, I think by the time of this video, we're going to get a new support for it. And if it's pretty good, anything noteworthy, I'll make a post for it so that I can at least acknowledge that new support card. But as for right now, I would say it's just fairly viable. You know, you could do pretty well with Thagria. Overlord, yeah, Overlord is also fairly viable. He's slumming it with Barrow, Greedon, Eugene, these kind of guys. You know, the kind of guys where, yeah, you've definitely got a pretty cool like gimmick going. You can take some kills, but at the same time, you can also get slammed at times. Overlord's pretty much what you would consider a coin flip deck. Sometimes Overlord can really just kill you so quickly thanks to the immediate crit pressure, good multi-attack, and just a good propensity to early rush. The early rush with Overlord is probably its main strength. And on the other side, Overlord himself as a Vanguard doesn't really scale all that well into the late game. He's constantly guzzling. Like his retards are not that bad, but at the same time, you know, it's a 4-attack turn, and it doesn't really have like that much power to back up its crit, and overall, it just doesn't feel that devastating of an offense turn after turn after turn. So the key here is, are you able to hurt your opponent enough that they can't properly establish themselves in order to stave off Overlord? If you're able to do that, then you kind of got it clutched. However, more recently, Overlord, I find, has fallen off a little bit. It still pops up. It still is a pretty cool, like, viable deck strategy. It's just that Overlord doesn't scale that well into the late game, I feel. It scales more in the early game. And so if that's the kind of deck that you're good with, as with the pilots who do make it into the top cut occasionally with Overlord, then hey, you're good to go with PBO. PBO is a really good thing to do. I know I've been calling Overlord because it's Phantom Blaster Overlord, but I just want to say it here in case it wasn't obvious. We're talking about Phantom Blaster Overlord, but we already talked about Overlord over here. So yeah, that's where I think PBO stands. Okay, so it's been a little bit since the top tier. Here's Youthberk. Yeah, get right up there, buddy. How's the throne? Does it fit your ass cheeks well? Because you're going to be sitting in there for a bit. Yeah, Youthberk is the new hotness on the competitive scene. Massive card advantage, good multi-attack, the ability to have a almost unrivaled level of consistency. Youthberk has so much going for it, dude. Tempest completely changed the game with this deck. It's my favorite deck in Standard. I played it extensively. I'm going to release a profile on it at some point here. And when competitive scene comes up again for me, I'm going to be taking Youthberk because it's just, my personal pick for the top deck. Now, let's talk about why I think it's the top deck. I already mentioned a lot of those bits, but going into it a little bit more, I feel that a lot of the top decks tend to have some sort of corner of the market that they inhabit where this is their advantage that makes them distinctive even among the other top decks. With Bastion, it's the unrivaled number of power. That's just what it is. It's got the biggest numbers. With Mahar has the damage ping along with the big numbers. That's its thing. That damage ping is a really cool X factor, which just keeps pressure up. It can even ride into Mahar Nirvana early. So between the ping and the early ride and the grade 4s being able to reach a lot of numbers, Mahar can go pretty quickly. So I would say it could be potentially the fastest of the top tier decks. What about Youthberk? Youthberk has advantage and consistency as its big benchmarks. Youth just can search out its use through several different means. You can get your revolve forms through several different means. You got your Schneizels, you've got your Skyfall arms, you've got your grade 1 the ride line. You can pitch it and bring it back with a grade 2 the ride line. Go on and just keep going, right? You can keep on getting those revolve forms. Tempest in particular. Tempest is a plus. It bot decks an opponent's units, and it gives 5k to the front row to make those really good numbers. Now, sorry. Getting a little nasally. Let's get a water break here. All right. Back to it. So, yeah, the thing with all that is Youth can it's an engine. It is a well-oiled machine. Youth just has the pieces and the ability to say siesta time. You can swing and rush early if you want with things like free days and Schneizels. Those are really good. You're also able to just get everything you need to see when you need to see it. Now, of course, there are a couple of weaknesses that you could ascribe to Youth. One of the things about Youth is that you would not see the revolve form, or you may not see the ideal revolve form, the ideal time. If you somehow don't see Tempest when it's time to go to grade 3, you could be saying, well, tough tortillas. It's kind of bad because where you're going to fall back on Gust for that level. I mean, if you're going second, I guess it's decent, but yeah, it's pretty Tempest reliant. But I don't think that's much of a problem because the amount of ways you can get Tempest is crazy. As I said, I've already listed Skyfall, Schneizel, Ride Line, right? One of the ride lines can recycle it back even. Caber, the new triple R, if you want to go with that route, that's another way to get Tempest, so on and so forth. It's just easy to get your Tempest, and with the amount of draw power that you see, you can get into more Tempest just as easily. Youthberk is fairly diverse. You can run more of a defensive mid-roll version with things like the Redays to defend you. You can run high-roll grade 3 versions with the Decisive Axe Dragon if you want. There's a lot of ways to build Youth. The things with Sequana and Wayward give you more advantage, and even a drive check to bring back to your revolve form, so you got more drive check pressure there than you did before. That's incredible. And if it just wasn't already enough, Youth's resource game is really nice. It has no soul problems. It's building soul a lot. Sequana, the revolve dressing, it just has no soul problems. And CB could be a problem, but you have a Nuclei as a dedicated countercharger to make it not nearly as a problem. And generally speaking, the only time CB is a problem is a bottleneck on turn 3 where you may only have access to a couple CB, but between grade 2 of the ride line, Schneizel, and Tempest, you might have to take your pick of 2 out of the 3 to prioritize. But aside from that, its resource game is fan-freaking-tastic. It is just a very well-rounded deck with few weaknesses and just god-tier consistency. So that's why Youth is in the top. Okay, Zorga. So we have a couple Zorgas. We have Red Zorga and Blue Zorga, and I'm actually going to be ranking them as kind of different decks, but they're going to go into the same tier. So they're going to be going right around here. Normally, I would have put it down here, but Zorga has been popping up a couple times, surprisingly. The thing about Zorga is they do have that new order, which, you know, can make the early game really strong. Thanks to the constant bit of revivals it gets, it can fight back against field control pretty well. And just overall, a competent Zorga player can make it work. Now, I don't think it's all that impressive, personally, but I've seen the results, and I can acknowledge that due to the variety of the alchemy magic and the just amazing resource game from the revivals, you don't just have Zorga's revival to go for it. A lot of your orders revive cards. You have the ability to revive with what's its name? They're like the grade 3 dragon that calls itself out when you play an order. That's a really good resource card. It just has the ability to sustain itself over a longer period of time. Now, the constant problem I found with Zorga is due to the combination of orders, which can hurt its defense a bit, and also its offense not being really big on the multi-attack. You could like lose the offense-defense ratio, as I call it. The ratio doesn't accumulate into like a bigger score than, say, something like Bavsagara, which has a really nice score of being able to hunker down and also present pretty big numbers. Zorga doesn't do that quite as well, but the X factor of revival is really cool in the matchups where field control is going to be a thing. It can especially say FU to things like Gravidia, which is a really popular field control thing. Flagburg, we're going to get into in a second, has a good field control that you can say FU to, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that X factor does make it a pretty decent pick and good variety for Zorga all around. Flagburg, it's highly competitive. No doubt about it. Flagburg just smacks the hell out of you, and it's got a lot of benefits. Basically everything in Flagburg now is a piece that you can work with, but even though it needs pieces, it doesn't need specific pieces. You just need good multi-attackers, and you've got a lot of them on hand now. You've got the promo, which can swing for the back row. You've got Alex. You've got the ride line working for you. You've got Inlet Pulse. Inlet Pulse gets its full effect with freaking Flagburg. That's astounding. You can do Order Flagburg if you want even more hand advantage to go for it. And Flagburg himself is just a monster. Draw, really good. The 3 or more battle door, incredible. And the X factor of retires thanks to Flagburg's skill, and also you can swing on the rear guards with if you're not able to hit over defenses. It just makes Flagburg such a devastating all-rounder deck that it just mows through most opponents. It's incredible. Now, Flagburg isn't like the top tier in my opinion, because by the time set 7 comes around, there are like other decks that seem to be a little bit more dominating. So this is more of a results-based pick. But if there's one card, if there's one deck here that isn't in the top tier that I think could just very easily fight the top tiers and give them for one of its money, it would be Flagburg. It can burst out, especially if it goes first. If it wins the die roll, Flagburg is coming for your ass. So yeah, it's just a really stable deck with the ability to just push hard and push in its own way. Flagburg really runs at the beat of its own drum. It doesn't care much about what the opponent does. So yeah, that's really cool. Even field control isn't so much of an issue because you just hold on to pieces that, you know, achieve the same effect of enabling Flagburg. Roer. So Roer is interesting. I'm going to say it's possibly viable. Roer just got the new grade 3 Radalina, which I think is the big support piece for it, and it does give it a 5th attack. However, Roer is a little bit weird. In testing with Roer with that new grade 3, I found that it can search out your pieces well enough and it can get to the 5th attack, but you need to line things up correctly. That can be a little bit difficult, and although your defense game is good, if your opponent gets rid of your pieces on the board, you may find it a bit tough to replenish your Radalinas to maintain your offense. So it has sort of, ironically for a plant token, aka Neo Nectar deck, it sort of has a rough field control matchup. That's one disbenefit to it. Also, another thing with Roer is, even though its resource game is pretty good, I will admit, it doesn't need a lot of CB, it doesn't need a lot of Soul Blast, you know, your main, you know, it doesn't need a lot of CB. Its Soul Blast is an issue. Now, you could run the, one card, I think it's like Cryosyphlim or whatever. It's the one that soul charges too, if you know. So you could run that. You may not always be able to line that up, but it does have kind of a soul issue. So over a protracted game state, you may run out. So it's kind of got that Stotea problem before it, unfortunately. So yeah, it stalls out at a couple bits, but I think it still has, you know, potential. Roer does have a lot of good things going for it. The ability to produce a board thanks to the tokens, Momoke, plant, stuff like that is really nice. Its grade 3 order is cracked. giving you more power, easy search, god tier. So it does have good things going for it. So I think it could have a shot at the meta. Leonor, it needs more. Yeah, I hate to say it. Now, Leonor's going to be at the top here because it does have a couple sets of support going for it. But here's the problem with Leonor. I feel like Leonor has an idea behind it, which is big threatening Vanguard swing, and it could potentially get 5 attacks, but it just feels sort of subpar, and it stalls out at particular points. Your soul's an issue. Your CB is an issue. Field control can really hurt your setup because you need to have a constant supply of 3 boosters behind there. Your multi-attack is reliant on a particular piece, one particular piece, rather than something that your Vanguard gives it itself. There's just a lot of issues with Leonor. It needs a better resource card, and I think it also needs something to incentivize playing this, you know, technically Vanguard center strategy, like either a guard restrict or maybe a crit for Leonor as well. Something just to make it more threatening and more worth it, because for all the ways that it could bottleneck, it can't close out the game quite as well as you would expect it to. So it just needs more. Magnolia. So Magnolia, I think, also goes around here. I've seen some grade 4 Magnolia lists pop up, and I think it's kind of cool. But the thing about Magnolia is, with the inlet restrict, it's kind of whopped down. Now, it is a 6 attack deck, and it can make some pretty good numbers, but it just doesn't keep up in terms of the defense game very easily. And if you do run into field control decks such as Gravidia, Dragon Empire decks can also give it a bit of problems, you know, things like that. Magnolia might not be able to keep up. So yeah, its offense-defense ratio, it does have pretty good offense, but it doesn't make up for sort of the lack of the defense on the other end of the spectrum. I will admit that it could be a pretty scary deck if it goes first and it's able to just get the 6 attacks off on you, but it's not that scary of a deck, I've noticed. Its power lines aren't that impressive. So even though it has more attacks than most decks, well, Flagburg has better power lines and 6 attacks potentially. Even though it has the 6 attacks, they're not that impressive. So yeah, that's why I think it's going to go down here. And of course, I just realized it's another situation. It's grade 4 Magnolia, because who plays grade 3 Magnolia, dude? You play grade 3 just to get to grade 4. That's basically it. All right, so Seraph. So I see the Seraph. I see the Pure Light. We're going to be talking about Pure Light. Pure Light is highly competitive as well. Pure Light just, it goes to the beat of its own drum. You imprison cards, you am on them, aka Trishula them, whichever you prefer, and you just play the resource game. It is a kind of deck that monopolizes its own form of battle and is really good at what it does. I don't think it's top tier necessarily, but well, I think no, I'm gonna make an exception. I think it's top tier. It is top tier because just like with Bastion, Youthberk, Mahar, it's got its own thing going for it. Seraph Pure Light's ability to just rip cards from soul and hand as well as field is really devastating. So once they hit the Pure Light and they have the really good numbers, and if they hit 10 in prison, oh god forbid, you're probably dead, especially if they hit the overtrigger at this point in the game. And soul's not an issue for them, and they can manage CB really well, so resourcing is not a problem for them. Seraph just has a lot of things going for it. Now, of course, if you, it has a sort of a, how would I call it? I would say it has a high skill prerequisite, right? It's not easy to pilot the deck effectively. So, yeah. Only take it if you're pretty confident in your matchups and you know how to pilot the deck well. But if you don't know how to pilot the deck well, yeah, you could definitely slash. And I've seen a lot of results with it too. So yeah, it does deserve to be in the top tier as well. Welstra, he needs more. Yeah, sorry, Welstra, buddy. Welstra's just, it only just recently came out, so I can't really blame him for not being able to do much. But yeah, his main disadvantage is that even though he has a cool 4 attack, I guess potentially 5, but you know, basically a 4 attack, he has a cool multi-attack, the ability to retire and reduce the Vanguard's power is a really nice combination of benefits in a deck. It doesn't have the card advantage. It doesn't have the ability to keep itself in the game. And since its offense isn't Bastion tier or something, it can't expect to win the game before it ends up losing the game. So it needs the ability to sustain itself. It needs more advantage above all else. You can also maximize on Freischild's maximum, pun intended, but it just needs more card advantage, dude. Okay, so Orfist. Now, I've only really seen grade 4 Orfist running, oh, not grade 4. I've only seen Deuce running around, so I'm not going to really think about regular Orfist. But as for this Orfist, yeah, I'm going to say he's somewhere right around here, I think. Yeah, he's like with Magnolia. Orfist has been popping up a fair bit. I like what Orfist does, you know? It's got more multi-attack going for it. The Shower Army tokens are pretty big. And at the end of the day, it's basically what you consider to be a really solid beatdown deck. But beatdown is more or less the start and the end of the story for Orfist. It just does what it does. Maybe you can't handle it and you'll get steamrolled. Other times, if you can handle it, if the opponent is able to establish themselves, then Orfist can keep up the defense game. So yeah, it's fairly viable, I would say. Kind of a roguish deck, but yeah, I mean, hey, take Orfist to a tournament, you could get some wins. You might even be able to top. Ava, I find Ava to be highly competitive. A bit down here though. Ava just is kind of cracked when it comes to its ability to just have that order as a massive resource plus, getting the counter charge, getting the ops gates for free, the ops gates being able to be retire resistant, you get good crit pressure, good power, you have access to really great branch gate tools that help you just resource really well, and of course the bind is another X factor. So Ava just has a lot of these interesting elements that make it a formidable deck in its unique way. It's a very unique deck, and that uniqueness does make it competitive. Now I think it's been on the lower end of the highly competitive because yeah, even though it does have like some tops, I also feel as though Ava just doesn't blow out an opponent the same way that other stuff can get blown out. You know, Seraph, Bastion, Mahar, they can blow people out. I don't think this really blows people out as much how even Flagburg and Overlord can blow you out. This one doesn't blow you out, but it just does have a lot of nice things going for it that makes it a very tricky deck to fight. It's tricky to be able to deal with Ava, and so yeah, I think it's highly competitive. Heroes, it needs more. Yeah, so again, set 7 didn't really do anything for heroes, so we're dealing with just a pure set 6 deck, and it doesn't have enough. Now, you technically have enough heroes in there to more or less play a complete hero list, maybe some compulsory helper, but then you're running things like Chipmunk, you know, that's not all that great, and the basic strategy of heroes is kind of nice. Base is, pun intended, a based ass card. It's really good for filtering out your deck, getting your pieces, and the combination of either defending with them or being able to call them to the field from the base, albeit it's a net zero in that case, is really good for the consistency and the functionality of a hero deck. The Vanguard himself is a little bit weird. He doesn't seem that impressive at first, but he does have the crit pressure, the nice numbers, and granting continuous MLB skill, as it were, to your rear guards, no crit, just, you know, continuous power to them is cool. It is a cool ability, and the multi-attack that it has does maximize on that ability, but heroes just need better options to like populate their deck with heroes so that base can hit optimally all the time. And also, I think that the 4 attack is cool and it has like some amount of swing power, but I don't think its power lines are as good as it could be. It is sort of a mid-roll deck, but it could stand to push a little bit harder because a defensive can really hurt your card, since you're looking at your grade 2s, and yeah, if you have your grade 2s on a persona ride, then they're going to be 25, but unlike Tama, which, you know, can hang in the game a lot better, and it's a 15k persona ride including to itself, and it's a 5 attack turn. This is 4 attacks, it doesn't hang as well, and yeah, it's not quite as strong, so it just needs more offensive pushing and just better representation. We need more heroes, you know. Gravidia is a top tier deck. Gravidia finds a way to sustain itself in the meta. I don't really think this is surprising. It is the best field control deck in the game. If you're wanting to play control, this is your deck. I know Eugene is another really good control deck, but this is your best one. This is just your best one. And yeah, I mean, there's not, ironically enough, for being such a strong deck, I don't have a lot to explain here. The meteors just bomb your opponent's entire field. You have really great crit pressure thanks to Gravidia being a good crit with a lot of power. The Bakuburito is another really good crit pressure unit. Shirgo recycles, and just the X factor of being able to double your trigger effect so you can get multiple draws off a draw, multiple heals off a heal. the over trigger to just win twice over in one game, lol. Yeah, it just really smacks hard while being able to just be so passive and negging your opponent so hard. Gravidia feels almost unfair as a deck. The only thing about Gravidia is that even though it has really good resourcing as well with CB, it hardly needs to use CB, so you can run combined rushers, and you also have really good resources for soul because you soul charge off your meteors. You could also end up having phantom hands a lot like Bastion sometimes. Now the order version of Gravidia makes this better because you can get the token for good early aggression, and the token's there as a consistent beater or booster. As far as your hand goes, you could be holding onto a lot of meteors rather than the defensive pieces, and so you could get broken through if the opponent is able to just hurt you hard and quick. If they go hard and quick on you, you may not be able to keep up with it, but yeah, that's sort of a die-hard strategy from the opponent, and it's hard to deal with Gravidia. You just need to be able to sort of bear with it and break through the defenses before you just lose all of your resources, and that's how to fight that. Okay, so we're on to the Lyrical stuff. So Lyrical, I'm not going to have much of an opinion on these. I'm not really big on Lyrical, but I do know what the Lyrical decks do, more or less. And so we'll just go through this kind of quickly. Celestial, yeah, it has potential. White Wings are kind of cool. Ability to, reduce the opponent's power, get a crit. These are all nice X factors for it. Kyrie, so okay, there's a grade 3 Kyrie. I'm sure Mr. Man here has, yeah, there's grade 4 Kyrie. So grade 3 Kyrie, like, watching Kyrie play, I forget the thing even has an effect. It's just all about grade 4 Kyrie. So talking about grade 4 Kyrie, grade 4 Kyrie is still a top tier. Is it a top tier or is it a highly competitive? I think it's more or less with Flagburg, so I'm going to put it right here with Flagburg. The thing about Kyrie is that it has a lot of resources, 5 attack turn, it's got everything you need to be. Kyrie has fallen off a little bit in my opinion. We haven't seen it quite as much, so that's why I think it's a little bit more towards the highly competitive bit. But yeah, it just, the self-balance is a cool X factor. The friends mechanic gives you a lot of draw power. So I actually feel it's sort of like Youthberk in a way. The consistency of getting your pieces is a little bit less than Youthberk, but it does have the 5 attacks over the Youthberk, which is a really cool thing. And yeah, just sheer draw power. It does what Bermuda does, and it does it better than anything else. This one, possibly viable. Powerful did get the nice rear guard drive checker, which just basically makes the deck, if you ask me, but still nothing too special about it. Clarissa is struggling. I don't see Clarissa anywhere. No one's really doing it, and I feel like it's been a while since Clarissa's got anything that was really good for it, so it kind of needs something else to sort of revitalize the deck. Michu possibly has something going on with the cannonballs. I actually saw a Michu list pretty recently in the Kyushu Cup results. So yeah, there is something there. I'm not that impressed by Michu, but considering it just came out and it's just got Lyrical set 3, I will say it definitely has, some potential. Mediel, this one is pretty cool. I actually think Mediel could be fairly viable, but it's going to be more down here along with like Orfist and Magnolia. The thing about Mediel is I feel that its trait of being able to stack, get the revive, it's got a lot of cool things going for it. Now, CB could be an issue sometimes. Sometimes you're not able to get, you don't get the result that you want off the top deck because your result changes depending on if it's a trigger unit or a normal unit. So if you get the wrong result or you weren't able to stack it, so you just don't get the result you want, you may not have that rearguard crit pressure multi-attack that you want, because that's how Mediel is supposed to win games, is through that. So I think that is where it sort of like struggles, is it kind of needs its system, its engine to work, and needs to keep on maintaining that engine. And so there's a couple different ways where it can go wrong for the deck. Lutetia, yeah, Lutetia is a highly competitive deck. I think it's like basically up there with Kyrie in terms of highly competitive. It just has the nice multi-attack off the Vanguard. It's a nice Vanguard-centric multi-attack. The soul charging is a nice touch. Being able to get the draw off a defensive order is cool. And yeah, it's just got the card advantage and the baseline level of offense. However, Lutetia does suffer a bit in terms of its rear guards, because even though its rear guards are good, if you don't see things like Nostria in a game, you're going to really suffer for it, because then you're purely relying on your Vanguard to do the lion's share of the fighting, and your opponent could be prepared to deal with that. It could be. So I actually think Lutetia And yeah, let's just put it like this. Yeah, they're basically like this, I think. So yeah, I like the deck a lot. It's my favorite Lyrical deck. I think it does a lot, and we see results with it. So it definitely has a really nice ability to stick in the game with the card advantage and still have a good consistent level of offense. But you know, it's not blowout exceptional like these. Leonor. Yeah, you can do stuff with Leonor, I think. You know, it's like there. Again, it's a Sentinel restrict on a Vanguard that can get really big with a crit. It's still pretty big. Now, it's a bit outdated by comparison, I will say, but I actually do still believe that Leonor could do something. But I'll stick with my guns and say Leonor. It can go here. Lifa needs more. Needs more. As a matter of fact, hey, you can go like here, Clarissa. Okay, yeah, Lifa its gimmick's pretty underwhelming. You know, it makes your big things boost. You can get some numbers, but it's so blasé and unimpressive in its payoff by comparison that it needs so much more. Hazoret. Hazoret also needs more. Hazoret has pretty good you know what, yeah, we'll put it here though. Hazoret has like a nice ability to do the charge mechanic, as it were, so you're bot decking a lot of your units after battle and then getting draws to compensate for it. So in terms of offense defense, it's got a perfect balance, but that balance doesn't accumulate into all that much. It needs more of what I would consider a win con card, because it's just going for basic Vanguard beatdown. Does have some multi-attack, but yeah, that's about it. Friends. I mean, sure, I guess you can do Friends stuff, but Friends Pure is not really that great. Friends found more of a home with Kyrie, funnily enough. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say here. Whilst, you need more, girl. Your gems are cool, but it doesn't have a strong enough win condition to make it work. You do have a pretty neat multi-attack, but it's not nearly as strong as a lot of these other guys. This is the Highlander thing. I don't know what you do with this. Yeah, I mean, you could do something with this. I haven't really seen it do anything. So it doesn't even have its own ride line. So yeah, it's pretty under supported. It definitely needs more. Felty, I don't see Felty doing anything. So I'm gonna put it right next to Clarissa. Felty seems to have fallen off. It is in dire need of something to revamp it as a deck, because I just don't see it around. Kyoka, yeah, Kyoka, you're going up here. So Kyoka, right around, okay, so Kyoka, I'm actually going to put a little bit more. You know, we'll put all the Lyrical decks together, I think. Yeah, and actually Ava can go in front of Bavs. So yeah, Kyoka, the thing about Kyoka is the magazines offer really good front row pressure, resourcing. You can get multi-attack with it. It's just got sort of a similar level of consistency and power to like these other two decks. I think it's a little bit more offense generated and a little less on its ability to defend. That's why I want to put it below Lutetia and Kyrie. But they're both still, like, well, both being all three of them, all three of them really good. They're all relative. These are basically the face of Lyrical right now. I personally might want to put it a little bit lower, but I have been sworn to that Kyoka is pretty good, and, you know, it just came out, so it doesn't have a lot of results going for it. So I'm just going to give it the benefit of the doubt and put it here. Yeah, that's it. We've hit the original ride line guys here, which, you know, of course, don't need to explain because we got their grade 4s or, you know, some alternative form instead. So that is going to be the list. Overall, Standard is in definitely a nice place. I like the meta here a lot more than with the V meta, which is dominated by Steam Maidens and, you know, Excel hell. And then also in Premium, I just think there's a lot of shenanigans with Premium. It's not that fun for me to play personally. So I found a home in Standard here for the time being. And it's a really diverse format. There's a lot of different decks you can take that are really viable. And overall, the back and forth between these like different strategies and how the ebb and flow of a game goes in Standard is just really, really enjoyable. I like this spread. This is a really, really nice spread of where decks are. And it just goes to show that, yeah, we're in a pretty healthy format. I mean, hell, we have 5 decks here that are like distinctly in the top tier, and you could have easily have argued that you had a few more that could have been up there. That's how great this like freaking format is. And so, yeah, there's a lot to love here, and I really like doing this list. So, even though I like this list, do you guys like this list? Let me know in the comment section down below. Comments, criticisms, suggestions, anything like that, I'm open to anything. Please let me know. And also, if you did like this kind of content, I got a lot more tier lists, like that V premium one I mentioned a couple times. And I've also got discussion videos, fight nights, things of that nature. He even top 10 videos a couple times, more on those though. There's a lot to watch, so go ahead and check it out. And do subscribe and turn on the notification bell while you're at it. And with that, take care. God bless.